Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today, Ash and myself are diving into a fun topic of discussing variation in training. I guess through things like CrossFit and even bodybuilding to a degree. I think back in the day with your chest day, how many different chest exercises you can do to grow your chest got really popularized, and we thought it'd be an interesting topic to maybe dive into to really discuss how much variation do you need. But as always, before we get into it, I just want to thank our sponsor, Whit Fitness. You can find their stores, if you don't know by now, it's in New Change, St. Paul's. Or you can go on the website for an even easier experience, www.wit-fitness.com, and use the code LL15 and save yourself 15% off your purchase. Don't forget to tag us and show us all over Instagram. So, Ash, how much variation do you need to become good at training?
Enough, I think, is the short story. The reason I'm keen to discuss this is that I think a lot of people have too much variation or think they need more than they actually do. And it seems to be one of the things that people love on social media, to just have these random, crazy, spicy workouts. And if there's ever a special occasion, then there will be a random set of movements with a random number of reps and a random time domain, because that's someone, like it's, if you're born on the 12th of January, you'll do 12 rounds of one rep. And if you're born on the 31st of December, it'll be 31 rounds of 12 reps. It's just, I think that's fun on the rare occasion. But in terms of effective training, I think everyone kind of knows that it's not the way to go about it. So if that's too much, then what's too little, and what's just right? What's the Goldilocks amount? And I think that's, what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that got me interested. It got me thinking there. Just, it's funny because like birthday workouts and stuff like that, I think they are good fun. As you say, I think that was the key thing you said there, is like fun. It's just like, as long as you understand that this is probably going to take you off of your training journey and have a little bit of a speed bump, shall we say, of a fun workout, then there's nothing wrong with that. And it's like, it's having fun in training is a big part of it, because it's what keeps you showing up. But I guess, as we'll get into, is like understanding where fun meets necessity, and kind of like what you have to weigh up at times to kind of get the most out of it. So I guess if we want to dive a bit into like why the need for variation has come about, and I guess it was before CrossFit, as I mentioned at the start there, like with bodybuilding. And I think when the classic bro split of, say, chest on Monday, back on Tuesday, maybe legs on Wednesday, shoulders and arms, then whatever you get, it's like there are so many different exercises, and it just gets me when I think back to now, like arm workouts that I did. And the reality is, on an arm workout, there's only really, say for like biceps, you've got two essential movements, right? You say got a normal curl and a hammer curl. Really, I know you can go further, but realistically, but you spend a whole hour basically doing like essentially what you'd need 5 exercises for, like if we're getting biceps and triceps. And but you think, I remember thinking at the time, is like, I need to do all these different ones to give myself the best possible chance for growth. And then I guess that carried over into CrossFit, where it's like because there's now so much to do. It's like, fuck, like what variation do I need to do? What accessory? What one's going to get me better here? And I guess it can be so easy to get bogged down in the weeds with variation, that it can kind of get confusing.
Definitely. And I think, I don't know if they still promote this, but the 3 tenets of CrossFit back when I started working in it was that it was functional movements that are constantly varied, performed at high intensity. And there are a lot of caveats to that. And how you interpret constantly varied has a massive implication on how effective the training is for you. Because we were laughing about it before we started recording from dodgeball, where the guy was just doing the muscle confusion method, where you've got to keep the body guessing. That is exactly the opposite of what you want from an effective training stimulus. The SAID principle, the specific adaptation to imposed demand, is that your body, whatever you ask it to do repeatedly, will adapt to it and become better at it. So if you're constantly changing what you're asking of your body, it's just confused and it's just asking like, what do you want from me? I don't know how to adapt to this. You're on Monday you're saying this, on Tuesday you're saying that, and I'm just stuck in the middle here. So by sending a consistent and repeated stimulus, that is how your body makes the most progression. And the sport of CrossFit is a really interesting problem to solve because there are so many competing demands on the body. How do you feed it the stimuli that it needs to adapt in all those different directions without confusing it so much that it blunts the adaptation in any effectively? And that's where periodization and programming and having it really well structured in a systematic way gives the body the best chance of doing so, versus just like effectively when you ask your body to do something that is unprepared for, that's when stuff goes wrong. Like if you're totally not ready for a session, that's when the chance of injury is greatest, because you like your motor patterns aren't there, you don't have skill in the movement, but also your tissue tolerance isn't there, you haven't built up over time. So say you have never snatched and then you go and like try and find a 1 rep max snatch on that day, your skills are off, your body hasn't developed any resilience in the bottom of an overhead squat at speed. Like it's not a great idea, and everyone intuitively knows that. But it's the same principle or the same sort of thought process for chucking somebody into a workout with random movements that they haven't built up over time, and you expect your body to hold up well. If your body hasn't had enough similar exposure to similar movements, loads, and volumes, then why would it be prepared for that workout? And it's a theme we keep coming back to, but the difference between doing CrossFit for health and longevity versus doing CrossFit as a sport do get blurred. And I think the onus is on the individual to understand why they're doing what they're doing versus just going with the flow and turning up to a random competition, doing loads of movements that they've never tried before at max intensity and weight.
Yeah, because that kind of got me thinking about the CrossFit Games workout that's just gone, event 4 for the individuals, which was the wall walk and heavy thruster. And even though the wall walk was introduced to the whole community in the open, it's not something I presume this I could be completely wrong here, but it's not the wall walk is not going to be an exercise that like elite level CrossFitters are doing probably regularly. However, they know that they've had enough exposure therapy through other variations, through say like handstand walks, just being upside down, handstand push-ups and so forth. So shoulder endurance of that localized area being under pure fatigue, and then a thruster. So as long as they've done say gymnastics with barbell, their body is primed enough through their own variation to be able to take on that task that they were given, and know that they'll be able to say get through it, not just like surviving it and actually thriving in it, because they know they've got good shoulder endurance, they've got good shoulder stamina, and they know they can kind of pull it out the bag when they need to. But I guess like that as a like a wall walk as a variation, most of the time at the most would be a warm-up for people. Like that would be, and a lot of the time, unless elite level is going to be different, but most people, the way they treat their warm-ups is just gotta get through it so I can get to the good stuff. And it's like, but that is priming the body. If you're doing it for the particular reason, that's priming you for the work to come, so that you're at a higher potential of just performance because you've primed yourself. And it's just as a variation of exercises. I think when it does come to like the elite level, they have so much exposure therapy to different movements, but it's consistent enough for them to get better, because they keep revisiting like their strength basics, the weightlifting basics, the gymnastics. You've still got the basic stuff, so their body is primed for positions that they might not have necessarily been exposed to directly, like as I say, like with the wall walk. So
yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it, and bang on in terms of the elite guys. They've had enough exposure to similar stimuli that a slightly novel one will be in their wheelhouse because they have covered so many bases. And I think it's one of the frameworks that I really liked from the Red Pill stuff is skill and threshold. And in any training, there's always a combination of both skill and threshold, and you can emphasize one or the other. And if you think of pure technique work as very, very skill based, you have long rests, you're never really working through fatigue because you're just trying to improve a motor pattern technique. And then like really hard, say, row intervals as pure threshold work because you're not skill limited. Like you are, and this is the sort of the beauty of the model is that there's never one without the other. Even if you're snatching a PVC pipe, at some point fatigue will be a limiter and the threshold will factor into it. And the same goes with rowing. Obviously, everyone's seen rowing technique go to shit when people are exhausted. And relating this back to variation, if you are constantly varying the skill or the exercise that you are performing, skill will be much more of a limiter than threshold. So if you are changing your squat variation every session and you don't do the same squat pattern for months, you're way less likely to be able to push your threshold and get much stronger in a squat. So having the consistency in movement selection allows the threshold to be pushed greater. And this is kind of the justification for bodybuilders using fixed machines, because they're removing or greatly reducing the amount of skill in the exercise, which means they can annihilate muscles much more easily. So a leg press requires a lot less skill than a squat. So the chance of overloading the leg muscles or the ability to overload the leg muscles is greater, which for hypertrophy is a good thing. For like general function in sport, maybe not. But the analogy I think of to illustrate this point is if you're trying to learn music and you change the instrument every time you practiced, it's going to be a lot harder to develop your skills. And it's the same for exercises. Like the process of skill acquisition for an instrument or an exercise is very similar. And if you're always changing the exercises that you do, you're not going to get as good at them as if you repeated the same exercises again and again. And if you look at anyone who's good at anything, they have put in a shitload of reps doing that thing that they're very good at.
Yeah. I guess it's like when you look in like the powerlifting world with Conjugate, it's like they have variations on their heavy days, all like pretty much week on week. So they're always doing something different. But most of the time it will still be their squat that they do with a variation. But then they also have their dynamic days where it is their movements that every week they have the squat, how they perform it in competition. So it's that they're still ingraining that correct movement pattern over it, so they're not forgetting it. So I think that's where like Conjugate is known for variation, and like there's so many different. Oh, cool! They're always doing this. Everybody's like, yeah, but look at what that variation is, and look how consistent. Like everything else, like it's just been doing the same thing over. And weightlifters, another prime example, obviously, with like weightlifting is such a boring sport and I remember when we listened to like Matt Fraser say it, and he goes, it's like to turn up to do the same thing day and day, and same as when Andre come on, and he even said, he doesn't have an emotion attached to it. He just knows it's what he needs to do to get good at it. That's why he's at the games now, because it's like he's now down on that skill that he needs to get better at, and he got better at it. And so going back to weightlifting, it's the thing of doing the same three movements essentially over and over again. Same as with powerlifting, and it's just getting good at that. And if that's your chosen sport, then you have to appreciate that. That's what you need to get good at. Stop looking for the new fancy way to get strong at the bench press when you just need to bench press and just do it better. So yes, there are variations and exercises that may assist with progressing your strength, but you still need to always be coming back to the movement that you need to perform.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the conjugate method, that people think there's a lot of variation, but they are just variations around squat, bench and deadlift. And they're all very similar motor patterns. And some degree of variation is required for skill acquisition. And it's a commonly repeated thing now that, failure is on the route to success. So you need to make errors to succeed. And the way this applies to movements and sports is, even though you're making mistakes, you can target the mistakes in the direction that you want to improve. So if you're always making the same mistakes, then you need to choose a variation that overloads the thing that's your limiter. So, for example, in the conjugate method, doing speed reps, if it's you're lacking speed, you're overloading speed by choosing a variation that works on it. If you're poor off the floor in a deadlift, you're doing deficits to overload pulling from the bottom part of the lift. So even though it's variation, it's not random. It is selected based on what is holding you back. And I think this is the case for more variation, just the right kind of variation for choosing what you're overloading. And the caveat here is that the better you get at something, the less variation you can handle, or you need to fine tune your motor patterns. So this is the difference between a baby learning to walk and they're like wobbling all over the place, falling forwards, back, left, right, spinning around, versus a tightrope walker. It's a very similar skill. It's walking without falling over, but obviously the stakes are much higher for a tightrope walker if they're on a skyscraper. So if we apply that principle to a sporting context, let's stick with weightlifting because it's a great example, is if you're always missing your lifts one way, then at the very simplest, using a variation that teaches you to miss the other way means the bar path is probably straighter because it's 50-50 versus 99% of your missed lifts are in front of you. And a common thing I've seen a lot with clients is if they're humping the bar, the hip contact is too strong in the snatch and they're throwing the bar out in front, then using no contact variation, so when the bar's way out in front, they will experience the error of going too far the other way. And that's how you learn to find the happy medium. But if you're always just banging the bar into your hip way too strongly, your body doesn't get the exposure to the other type of error, which it can eventually equalize. So that's the case for variation to improve a certain aspect of a skill. And the other one, sort of the one of my favorite ones from Matthew Said's book, Bounce. He's basically a table tennis guy who is kind of similar to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, that the talent is built, not born. You're not born with it. And he talks about another table tennis pro who was famous for his lightning fast reactions. Like, he seemed to be able to get back shots which no one would be able to see, let alone get the bat on the ball. And it turns out that he learned a lot of his table tennis growing up by playing in a small shed. So he just didn't have any space behind the table. So he was forced to react faster in his table tennis training than he would have time for in normal circumstances. So you're overloading the skill of reaction time through the setup. And that's essentially why good coaches choose the variations that they choose, is that they know what the limiter is and they're trying to targetly, if that's a word.
I know what you mean.
They're trying to target the specific limiter with a smart variation. But where I think people go wrong is that they choose variation for variation's sake because they haven't accurately identified what is the actual limiter. So they just think, I'm just going to, chuck it against the wall and see what sticks. And we can be better.
Against the wall, mate.
Spaghetti.
Okay, spaghetti. Okay.
That's the saying, yeah.
Mate, I get it. I know what you mean. And it's like, I think when it comes to sticking with the weightlifting, I think it's a really easy one for a lot of people to think about as well. So using the snatch, and it's just like, cool, okay, so if you know what you're weak at, say you're weak from the floor, you're always throwing it behind you, as you said, or you're banging the bar too much, understanding what variation is needed to improve your skill. So like if you're weak from the floor, cool, you might need to do some deficit snatches, so you're focusing on a bigger pull, or just some snatch pulls, so you're getting yourself, you're overloading that movement pattern. But if you're really strong from the floor and you never have an issue getting it up, you just have an issue holding it overhead, then don't do the deficit or the snatch pulls, because that's not your weakness. And so that's a variation that's there for someone that needs it. So it's why we're big advocates of obviously filming your lifts in whatever it is, because unless you've got a coach that's there looking at what you're doing wrong, you need to understand where you're going wrong so that you know where to improve. Because otherwise, as Ashley, if you're throwing the spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, you're wasting time. And it's like, and for some people, they're not bothered about that. They just want to do some deficit snatches. They want to do some snatch pulls, and that's completely fine. But then you have to understand that you're taking away your opportunity for growth, because you could be progressing faster by being more specific with the variation that you need. And we've touched on previous episodes as well. And it's like, when you're in the gym environment, it's easy to get caught up in other people's variations of other people's weaknesses, and you're just like, do you know what? That's a good exercise. I'm going to do that. And I've been culprit to that. I know that I've done that, and it's just like, you justify it because you think it's going to be making me better, and it's like, it probably is going to make you better, but better at something you're already good at. And it's like, and this is not necessarily a problem, but you could be getting even better with something that's more specific. And I think that's where variation, as you said, is as you get more and more elite, the variations that are needed to improve are so much less, because you've just fine-tuned that skill so high that a lot of the time it is just then trying to get stronger overall. So then actually thinking about this, and this makes me wonder, when you get to elite level weightlifting, you probably do deficits, snatch pulls, overheads, but because you're so good at the whole movement, you're trying to bring everything up. So then technically, do you need to actually have more variation? So that's me asking against your, I'm talking about elite then, so
that's assuming that the elite person is across the boards balanced.
They would probably still have to do more of, say, a specific thing based on their body type, that they are maybe a little bit weaker overhead. So they have to do, say, 2-to-1 overhead from the floor work. But I guess as you get to that level, you probably do expose yourself back to again, it'd be the basics though. It'd be the basic fundamentals, because you are bringing it all up. You're not trying to find, what is my limiter? You know what your limiter is. So you're going to bring it all up and say, I'm going to double down a little bit on, say, this overhead work or something like that.
Yeah, I think the margins become finer, but the principles stay the same. And one of the ways we can see this in a really nice example is even the most elite CrossFitters, Tia and Matt Fraser, are known because they don't really have a weakness. But pretty much everyone else, you can see an area of their game, either like whether it's strength or it's fitness or it's a specific movement, which is a bogey movement for them. And that's why Tia and Matt were so dominant, is because they didn't have those. And that's very rare. And I think you would apply the same to even elite weightlifters. Their coaches probably know what it is that's holding them back. They'd be in a very privileged position if it was just purely doing more of the simple movements that's stopping them. I think even if it comes down to, left shoulder stability is what's stopping you catch that snatch, then there is a variation that can be applied to bring it up, because whatever you're adapting towards, you're adapting against something else. So as you get good at something else will probably drop off. And, I'd love to see somebody who is perfectly balanced in every way, but I've not seen it yet.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, it's like, it's not even that necessarily you're say always weak at a specific thing. Especially I'm now kind of going towards, say, weightlifting, because the Olympics and stuff like that, we've been watching a bit of the weightlifting stuff. It's been really interesting, because these people, they do the same things day in, day out. Like that's what they do, yet they still miss on the big stage. and that goes beyond them being able to do the movement. It's being stepping up to the stage. So then you look outside of the actual training stimulus and actually think, cool, okay, it's actually the mental game and being able to perform on the stage. Because what was it, Zoe Smith, like she bombed hard, and like I think she only got 2 out of 6 lifts, and it's like she's such a good lifter. And it's like, and I remember I read her post and stuff, and it was just, she was just saying how it's so disappointing. You can imagine you prep all this time and it just doesn't go right. And it's like, and it's not saying anything about her lifting technique or anything. It's just like she just couldn't pull it out of the bag on the day. So then there's a whole new element when, especially when you go into the elite stuff. But it's just, for me, it's so fascinating to see at that level, and especially when you look into their training and stuff and you see the levels of variation that they have in their lifts. Like, it depends on how much they actually post on social, but it doesn't look like there's loads of variation, and that's why they get so good at what they're doing.
Massively. I think, it's unimaginable to put yourself in their shoes and feel what they feel in the build up and on the day, for something like the Olympics, especially with the pandemic, and such strange circumstances going into it. But you're spot on in that the variation doesn't need to be limited to movements and sets and reps and intensities. Actually, the stimulus can be psychological as well. And having had a year when there have been no in-person competitions and training together as a team has been very limited, that is a huge part of effective preparation for such a big event. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with the whole Simone Biles thing, but I think that was a massive example of, it's not just training, it's not just a sport. And for somebody so incredible to do something like that just makes it very, very apparent, whatever you think about it. It is a huge implication in sporting performance. And I think rightly it'll get more attention now, because it clearly does carry through into the higher stages.
Yeah. And it's just all these thoughts about the Olympics now just come into my head. And it's just, when you think about like, just think about variation, and I just think about like skateboarding and BMX, and the fact that's now into the Olympics. And it's like, skateboarding is like the equivalent to CrossFit, essentially, because there's so many things of the same thing, if you know what I mean. So there's just so much you can do. And obviously with skateboarding, it's about showing off all the different skills that you can do with that, essentially, like the muscle up, that and that, and you're doing like the heel flips, kick flips, board sides, all those fun things. And it's when you become a master of it, and because with skateboarders, that's what they do. And it's like, that's them practicing. And I cannot wait to see how that sport evolves, because that's essentially what I did as a kid. Like, you never, and I remember hearing what Tony Hawk said, and he was just like, I used to just do this for fun. And now to see this at the highest stage, essentially, of a sport that it can be, is like, where's that going to go into? Like, what, same as BMXing. It's like, I used to ride my BMX around as a kid all the time. And it's like, just imagine if you thought, actually, there is a way to actually get, like, this can be a thing. It's just, it's insane. And you just think about how much, like, they get so good at that skill, say skateboarding, and it's like, there's not too much variation, if you know what I mean. They're using the same bit of kit, and obviously there's all the different movements that they can do with it, but it's just the same thing, a progressive overload of particular movements. It's just an interesting thought.
Yeah, massively. I just wanted to finish up on the variation stuff with some sort of takeaways. I think, given everything we said today, how do you actually leverage this knowledge? And as always, we're going to say, get clear on what your stimulus is. If you want to get particularly strong or fit in a certain way, then 1, being clear on it, and 2, staying close to it. If you can identify your limiter, then variations to tackle that limiter directly. It could just be as simple as pure threshold work. So if it's squatting more and squatting heavier, that could be all it takes to get your results. But if it's more skill-based, if there's technique limiters that are holding you back, if there are muscle imbalances that are holding you back, then addressing those. So looking at both the skill side of the equation and the threshold side of the equation is how you would guarantee leveling up. And obviously that in competing, it is the pinnacle of both skill and threshold. So for weightlifting, when you are going to the Olympics, then lifting as heavy as possible with as good a technique as possible is the goal. But it's very hard to train like that and accumulate meaningful volume, because if you're always maxing out both, you're not likely to overload both, because one of them will be limiting you. So having that in the back of your mind when you are training and programming will be a very systematic way to structure things and get the most out of it.
So as my takeaway from the episode, from the stuff you said, so you're saying that doing random exercises, it will not get me to where I want to get to, no?
Depends where you want to get to, but
that's a good answer. That's what you want.
Random training gets random results. Everyone says that a lot. That's true.
Yeah, we like that one. And the thing is, I think it's, if you are training randomly, then most of the time that probably just means you don't know what you want. And that's still better, I would say, than not training at all. So you're getting somewhere, you're moving forward, and your random training might be exposing you to different styles of training that you want to actually double down on. So it's fine to do random training, but I think it gets to the point where you do need to maybe take a step back and think, cool, what is it about the random training that I like, and what do I want to get better at? And if you do just want to stay with, say, the random sessions where you just sweat and move, then cool. But understand that when you look around and other people, even in those sessions, are probably getting better than you, that might be because they're actually doubling down on maybe a strength portion of it or some conditioning portion. So they're actually specializing in that. So then when they come back to this random, say, session, they're actually better because they have specialized. So just, stay in your lane, have a look around, and try and look to get better at something specific to then help you get better overall. But as always, thank you very much for listening. We hope you got something out today. Really enjoyed this conversation. And if you did enjoy it, please do share it with others. Share it on Instagram, share it in your group chats, wherever you want. Just try and get the message out there of Lunge and Lift. And we're just trying to help educate others and bring everyone up as we bring ourselves up. So thanks for your time as always. And we'll catch you next week.
Cheers, guys.